Area chapter. I always forget that new feature. Well, thanks everyone for coming to the Burlington area chapter meeting. It's so great to see a lot of familiar faces and a couple new, and really appreciate everyone taking the time to come out on a beautiful Wednesday evening. So my name's Emily Krosnow, and I am the chapter leader, and I'm just thrilled to see everyone here and really appreciate, again, everyone coming out. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared around as well. And I'm super excited because tonight we have a very exciting forum, as well as Nell is going to talk about community police, control police. And so I want to just give a couple updates about the forum before we begin. So this is a Ward 3 special election forum for the RAD endorsement. As hopefully most people know on this call that Ward 3 City Councilor Brian Pine was appointed to CETO, which means that there's an open seat in Ward 3 for that position, and the election is in August. And we have two amazing candidates joining us today from Ward 3, Joe and Owen. So a couple things about the voting process for the endorsement. You can only vote if you are a RAD member, which means that you give financial support to RAD as a sustaining member. I think if Tom or Sophie would drop that in the chat of how you can become a RAD member and a voting member for future elections as well. I am a sustaining member. I don't live in Burlington, so I can't vote, but I live in South Burlington and vote for statewide endorsements and county endorsements. So if you are a sustaining member already, you will receive a form to cast your ballot, and you will have about a few days to vote. So it won't be immediate. So there'll be a couple days once you get your ballot. This forum and chapter meeting is being recorded. So I believe Tom said that a link with the forum will go to all of the voting members so they can review it. Or if you were on this and you had a question that you didn't get answered and you want to email one of the candidates or get some more information, that's totally great too. And we will share it as far and wide as possible. So these are some reminders for the candidates. This is not a debate, this is a forum. So we're asking questions about your policies and campaigns and not about your opponent's policies. There's a 5-minute maximum for an answer. However, personally, that is a long time. So if you'd like to yield the rest of your time, that is also welcome. But if you need the full 5 minutes, that's okay too. You'll be allowed an opening statement, and RAD has prepared questions which we will ask in the first part of the forum, and then we will open it up the floor for a Q&A from our fabulous audience. If you don't feel comfortable asking your question, you can, of course, put it in the chat and I'd be happy to read it to the candidates. If you'd like to be anonymous with your question, that's okay too. And you can privately message me and I can read, I of course will know, but I will read it anonymously to the candidates and all of you. Totally fine. So you'll just raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can ask, or you can DM or write it in the chat. Okay, so, and then after our wonderful forum, we will hear from Nell with a presentation on community controlled police in Burlington and the campaign for that. So thank you for being here, Nell, as well. So, all right. So first, I guess we didn't pick who goes first, but I don't know. Would anyone like to go first? Okay.
Owen, you go ahead.
Okay, so Owen will go first. So Owen, would you please, hello also, would you please introduce yourself
Hi.
and kind of an opening statement and who you are, how you identify, and anything you would like us to know, race, class, ability, gender, sexuality, or anything else that feels relevant. Oh, Tom has something.
Just also as a quick note, we're limiting answers to 5 minutes. This is going to be super casual. I'm pretty sure none of your answers are going to exceed 5 minutes, so feel free to yield your time. It's encouraged, but I will be setting a timer just in case. But I'm sure neither of you two will fill those 5 minutes, and that goes for every single question.
Okay, so Owen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your opening statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this. I'm excited to be here. While I haven't actually been actively involved in the organization, I've kind of been on the periphery here and there. I had kind of great admiration for the collaborations that happened between rights and democracy. I used to work for Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility many years ago, and always, was well aware of the collaborations that happened between our organizations, and so I've kind of kept an eye on things over the years. So my name is Owen Milne. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Burlington on St. Paul Street, and I've been a resident of Burlington for about 7 years now. I work at the Community Sailing Center in Burlington, and over the past decade or so, have been actively involved in the community for on a related number of organizations. I won't go into too much detail into any one of them, but have had the opportunity to work for in both the kind of for-profit sectors in workplace consulting, and then also in the nonprofit sector, for Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. Also, I would say, kind of some of the one of the more notable pieces of things that I've focused attention on over the years has been green building advocacy, through Vermont Green Building Network. We used to participate regularly in the State House during that time that I was there. And then another piece of effort that I had been more recently involved in was the development of Detail Works, which is a job skills program that creates a kind of very nurturing environment for young people in Burlington that allows them the kind of job skills in an environment that is controlled. It's actually in the area of teen and young adult job skills programs in the area. The percentage of kids that usually go on to actually get a job after 90 days is about 30%, and that's considered a high performing one. This particular program that we created has a 90+% placement rate. So we're really kind of excited about that. We think that's a model that could be used elsewhere. But and for the purposes of my community service work, I've been humbled to have received the Rising Stars Award back in 2011 and more recently the Peter Clavell Award for Community Service in 2019. That kind of aside, the reason why I'm doing this is really because I have had the benefit of being able to work and watch Brian Pine closely over the past number of years. During my time down at the Sailing Center, I've kind of interacted with the city on a number of different issues. And any time that I ever had, I needed to learn about how to engage the city as it relates to our lease, or whether it had to do with, issues that were going on in Burlington, I could always call up Brian, and he answered the phone, gave me the unbiased opinion. And then when it came time to actually get the work done, I was amazed at how much time he would put into helping, our organization, move the ball forward and get things done with the city. And come to learn, that my experience was not just my experience, that was experienced by many of the residents and businesses and other people who live and work in Ward 3, that is the epitome of what servant leadership is about. And when I learned that he was moving on from, I said, I would love to be able to help Brian live out that that legacy of servant leadership on city council. So that's really why I'm doing it. I appreciate all of the opportunity for us to get kind of into the details of what that how the servant leadership will play out. One more thing I do want to make mention of, Tom, is that I think today we were confronted with something that in Chris's statements about his opinions on transgender people in our community. I want us to float. I want to float the idea. I know it's a little unorthodox, but I think we're at a juncture where we've got a real need to combat this type of negative bigotry that we've been trying to avoid and get over the past 4 years is now resurfacing in Burlington. I know you typically only endorse one candidate. I think over the course of this forum, you'll probably see that Joe and I share a lot of the same values. I'm going to float the idea to you of thinking that I'm curious to see if you'd be willing to consider supporting two candidates moving forward to try and combat what we're up against now in the city. So I'll leave it there. I know we've got lots of things that we want to cover off on, and I can appreciate that.
Sure, thank you. Just before we go to Joe quickly, okay, thanks, Tom.
I just want to kind of explain that a little bit more, because I don't think this VT Digger article was particularly good at actually pointing out what's going on, but the other candidate in the race, Christopher Aaron Falker, is a Republican candidate for this Ward 3 seat. He has been particularly active on Twitter this past few years, and he has retweeted and supported a number of views which are widely considered as transphobic. It seems to be his belief. And I would like to also add that initially I did try and reach out to Christopher because RAD is a non-partisan organization, to ask whether or not he would like to apply for RAD endorsement. He didn't get back to me, but since then I did find out about these transphobic tweets and we rescinded that offer.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for giving some context. It is just horrible. Okay, now we're going to go to Joe. Joe, would you like me to repeat the question, opening statement, kind of why you're running, your campaign message, and how you, anything you want to include about yourself? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. My name is Joe. For those who don't know me, I use he and they pronouns. I live on North Champlain Street in Burlington, and I've been a resident of Burlington for about 8 years since I came here to go to UVM. I grew up in Vermont and graduated from Harwood in Duxbury. And, you know, Burlington has kind of been the place where I have envisioned myself putting down some roots, and I've seen how that is out of reach for so many folks in Burlington, myself included. I'm a renter and I've faced the struggle of trying to find housing and employment that make it possible to stay in the city. And it was a big hesitation I had when initially considering whether or not to even run for city council. So after making those sort of considerations, I did decide to get into the race, and really glad to have won the Progressive Caucus this past week, and looking forward to a pretty strong campaign here over the next several weeks. We've got such a tight timeline, so really appreciate RAD pulling this together and giving everyone an opportunity to have this conversation. One of the biggest issues that I'm running on is housing security, and not just making sure that housing is affordable, but making sure that the rental units in the city are safe and up to code. I think that is something that we've seen time and again become an issue. I want to make sure that we are making investments with the money that's coming into the state and the city through the federal recovery funds. We're getting money that's going to be available for affordable housing specifically, and even more infrastructure money coming down that we really need to make sure that we're using well, and making sure that our recovery from COVID-19 is just and equitable. And I think it's a perfect segue to thank Brian for his years of service to the city and congratulate him on his appointment as CETO director. CETO has been doing so much vital work, making sure that BIPOC businesses are getting the assistance that they need to apply for COVID recovery grants. And, they will play a vital role going forward as we continue to recover from the pandemic. I'm running because I see all of these issues that we face, whether we're talking about housing or income inequality or childcare, as interconnected. And our policymaking process really needs to reflect that. We need to address these issues for working people, and making sure that the policy outcomes are equitable and just on those fronts as well. And, the last thing I'll say before we get to the questions is, we need to do a lot better job in the city as we try to deliver racial equity. I think our boards and commissions process really needs to be evaluated in terms of who's serving on our boards and commissions. I'm the vice chair of the Board of Tax Appeals, and it was really a challenge for me to be able to figure out the process for even applying, first of all, but then making a meeting in the middle of the day as a young professional serving on a board with a lot of lawyers and real estate agents who have established careers and are able to make that meeting. So that is something that I'll hope to do on the council as well. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to some questions.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, and I saw Owen nodding, and I agree that is a problem. I'm on two boards here in South Burlington, and I work in this field, and it was a challenge enough for me. And so the average person, and I will say in South Burlington now we have a high school student on one of the boards. So that's really cool that they have that, a 17-year-old doing that. Okay. So now we will start with Joe then. RAD stands tall against enormous forces working against their agenda, from industry to media to institutions to politicians across the political spectrum. For leftists to win and progressive policy to succeed, it is important we stand together and support each other in solidarity. Oh. Thank you, Lucy, for coming. So can you, has there been a time when you did not support the most progressive candidate in a local race? And if so, what was your reasoning? And is there a time that you can name when you did support that person or persons in those races? So we're going to start with Joe this time. So Joe, can you answer that one? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Emily. I got my start in politics in 2015 and turning for Senator Sanders' first presidential campaign. And that was sort of my introduction to electoral politics and also working with RAD. And, you know, since then, I've been proud to support, I think, every RAD endorsed candidate since 2016. And, you know, I've worked on many of those campaigns, whether Karina Driscoll's campaign for mayor in 2018, Max Tracy's campaign for mayor this past cycle, Emma Mulvaney Stanik's campaign for state representative. You know, RAD's values are my values. And so it makes it pretty easy to support those candidates when those opportunities come up and really bolster those efforts to support leftists and get leftists elected to office, because we need more diverse voices on city councils, on select boards, in the state house, and in our statewide offices as well. So yeah, thank you.
I was on mute. Okay, I'm always trying to be so good about that, but I didn't. Okay. And now, Owen, would you like me to repeat that question, or do you feel comfortable answering it without me repeating it?
So just the question was, has there ever been a time where I was not supporting the most progressive person in a campaign? Yeah. I would say the only one that comes to mind was I did not support Sue Minter for governor, and the kind of story, you know, kind of leading up to that was that I was a commissioner with Serve Vermont, appointed by Governor Shumlin, and had the pleasure of working closely with Hal Colston, who was then the director of that. At the time of Irene, Serve Vermont became the organization that was leading volunteer coordination for disaster recovery. And Sue Minter at the time, I believe, was transportation secretary. And I will never forget being on a call where she took a very adversarial, and I would say borderline bullying approach against Hal Colston and myself and another commissioner who were trying to get resources to continue doing the work that we were trying to do. And that experience painted a very clear picture of how I thought that she would work as a leader. It felt in a way, and I don't know how many of you know Hal, but I can't imagine anyone wanting to bully Hal for any particular reason. So that was the one time I ultimately ended up deciding not to vote for her in the election after that, later on.
Thank you, and thank you for your honesty. in that. Sometimes being a candidate, you get questions asked about past elections and, it can be difficult. So thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a question about policing. Our policing system needs major reform. Vermont has the highest rate per capita of Black men incarcerated. Interactions with law enforcement show significant racial disparities in police interactions of people of color. There is very little accountability for the actions of police, and the accountability process is convoluted, opaque, and seldom leads to results the community trust in. How would you approach police reform in Burlington and change the way we police in Burlington? So I believe first we'll start with Owen now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a really important question. So the first step in this is that we are about to get a wealth of data and information that's going to be available to us as a result of the consultant's work in investigating and looking at the comprehensively, what are the activities that our police force is undertaking on a regular basis. I would say that the first step of what we're going to be tasked with looking at is identifying to what extent the resources that we align and the money that we spend as a city aligns with the activity that's undergoing by the police. We do not need armed personnel making traffic stops. We do not need tactically trained individuals responding to fender benders. For so much of many of our resources within that police force are focused on individuals that are trained for things that are either that are not relevant to the actual work that's being done, or they are being aligned during the times of day when it's not necessary for it to be done. So the first step is to actually restructure the organization so that what we're spending money on aligns to the needs of what our community are. That's step one. I have had the opportunity to work with a number of officers, and while they may not necessarily be bad individuals, their training puts them in a position where they only have the tools to respond in a certain particular way. When a hammer is the only tool you have, nails are all you see. And that's the way that they often respond to even the most simple interactions with the public. So that's step number one. Step number two is after we've started to realign that, I think we need to restructure police into a larger system of public health and safety. Instead of just having a Department of Police, I would say that the police need to be brought into a new organizational structure that we would task with being the Department of Health and Safety for the city of Burlington. And the reason I say that, and I know we'll get into this a little bit later, is that we need to have an organizational approach to spending money on social services in the city of Burlington. And I think creating a Department of Public Health and Safety actually will start to get us there, and the police would be underneath that. They would not be self-governed. The police would actually report to a director which oversees that entire thing. So the police chief would actually have a boss so that they're not the king of their own kingdom over in the police department. And I would say that organizational structure would bring in an additional level of oversight that's drastically needed within the city of Burlington. And I know Minneapolis is actually looking at this very thing of how they restructure their police department. And then third, I would say that the police department needs a new level of accountability in how we identify what we would consider to be good policing and what we consider to be bad policing. Right now, they get rewarded for things like drug search and seizure. They get rewarded for pulling people over and writing tickets. We need to actually create a new system by which we actually reward positive behavior, in addition to the work that we do to actually correct and address negative behavior as well. Those are a few of the things that I would start to do. And then lastly, the fifth thing I would say is that our new chief, or whatever we decide to call that particular position, I would say cannot and should not come from a tactical background. It should be somebody that has a long history of understanding how to drive social and cultural change within organizations. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful and detailed response. Joe, would you like me to repeat the question, or do you feel like you can go ahead and answer?
I think I got it. I think this question has to start from a place of recognizing the white supremacy inherent in policing as a structure. And, I supported community control of police when it was in front of the council, and unfortunately got vetoed by the mayor. So I'm glad to see and looking forward to Nell's presentation later. Glad to see that folks are going to be out really making sure that we can get that across the finish line. I think we need to move in a direction of abolition, and I know that's not going to happen overnight, but we can't continue to operate in the system that we have currently. And I think that starts with the way that the mayor has handled so many crucial decisions, back in March when he initially announced that he was going to replace Director Green, and then backed away from that. And then we got this completely inadequate report from the city on police transformation. And so, we've got a slew of bad decisions that are falling short of where we need to go in terms of policing in the city. And, I think Owen's right in terms of our search for the next police chief. Whoever that person is needs to be willing to come to the table and have these conversations about how we continue to redirect funding towards city services that don't involve armed officers showing up to folks experiencing a mental health crisis, to traffic violations, to all of these things that don't require 3 or 4 police cars and however many officers to show up for somebody who's having a difficult time and struggling. We can't continue to criminalize unhoused folks in the city. That's an incredible problem that we're having. And so, we have a lot of work that we need to do. And I'm looking forward to the conversations with the Battery Park movement and community control of police and so many others as we start making these vital steps towards change.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, well, now we're moving on to my favorite topic, housing. And obviously we had an incredible housing champion as Ward 3 City Councilor Brian Pine. So it is widely recognized that the cost of housing in Burlington is unattainable, and there is not enough affordable housing available for working people. Landlords are able to take advantage of the situation, and many of us live in crumbling apartments at the mercy of unscrupulous landlords charging exorbitant rents. Tell me how you will push to make housing more equitable in Burlington. And I believe, I lost track. Who's going next? Is it Joe? Joe? Okay, Joe, housing. How are you gonna help us?
Well, this is a crucial question. You know, Burlington had a housing crisis prior to COVID, and it's only gotten worse during. You know, I was proud to support just cause eviction, which I know you all worked incredibly hard for, and looking forward to working hard to make sure that that gets across the finish line in Montpelier in January. And you know, I would support rent control. As I said earlier, you know, we not only do we need to make sure that the housing in the city is affordable, but that the units that tenants are renting are safe and up to code. You know, we have a situation right now where the way UVM's billing for housing works, it kind of sets the tone for the Burlington housing market, and there's no real incentive for landlords to make any measurable improvements to their units, but they're still able to raise rents year after year. You know, it puts a real sort of predatory nature on our housing market, and has tenants at a real disadvantage. And so we need to do a lot to combat that. You know, we are going to be getting a lot of money in the state for building new affordable housing units. Brian's work at CEDO is going to be crucial in that on that front. And you know, I really do hope to be a voice for tenants on the city council. And you know, I recognize that many homeowners and many working families saw an unfavorable reappraisal in April, and might see an increase on their tax bill. So that's something that we need to look at also. But I think tenants really need an advocate right now, and I hope to be that person.
Thanks, Joe. And Owen, do you need me to repeat the question or kind of, okay, thank you.
Yeah. You know, over the past, I guess, month at this point, I've had the opportunity to make 100 calls to people in Ward 3. And the thing that I hear consistently time after time after time is that they cannot afford where they live, and it is rent. So I'm glad you know, this question is being asked. The way that I see the solutions moving forward for this, you know, are doing what we can to increase the supply of affordable housing, and looking at what our current volume of housing is and how it's being used. There's another component of this too, is that there's 6 months left in this term. So I'm not entirely sure that I could solve it in 6 months, but there's a couple of things that I think we could actually tackle together. One, and this is in the area of the existing housing stock. So short-term rentals is something that we need to move forward on regulating short-term rentals better. So what short-term rentals does is it just maintains wealth in the hands of the people that own property. It is something that is easy for us to regulate and move more product into the housing stock that allows us to get closer to you know, increasing that competitive value of what's available for rental. So often in the Planning Commission, you know, it was the voices of property owners lamenting how this would eat into their profits, and that's something that I just don't think we this is not the time to be defending short-term rentals. So if I was, brought in as city councilor, I would actually be really working really hard to bring the stories, the affordable housing challenge stories that I've been hearing over the past month to that commission, so that they're hearing not just from the people that own the properties, but also about the need for us to be able to put those properties into the market and available for rent. So that's one thing I'd be focused on. The second is an issue that hasn't been brought up yet that I actually is a new idea that I want to start putting forward, which is to actually create a city ordinance in Burlington that requires multi-tenant buildings to be offered up to sale of the tenants before they are put to sale on the market. We actually do this at the statewide level already for mobile home parks. So the law is already there at the state level for us to be able to do that. Home ownership, especially in certain parts of Ward 3, is exceptionally low. In fact, Ward 3 is probably some of the lowest home ownership on a percentage basis than everywhere else in Burlington. This would be a really easy way for us to start putting wealth back into the hands of our neighbors, and get that and make our housing not just more affordable, but actually more equitable. Those are actually two things that we could do in the next 6 months. Again, in order for us to accomplish that, that really is about bringing the stories from our neighbors to those commissions. That's the kind of work that I'd be interested in doing to move those initiatives forward.
Great, thank you. All right, we actually have one more question. So Rights and Democracy pushed and won the vote for 3 of the 4 charter changes in the city of Burlington in our last municipal election. At this current time, the only one that looks likely to go through the State House without significant changes is the Airport Commission charter change, the only one that RAD did not endorse. How will you, as a city councilor, hold our city government accountable and work with the Burlington state representatives to make sure the will of the people is honored for the other 3 charter changes? So, Owen, I believe you're first. So kind of how will, if you're elected, how will you hold our city government accountable for what Burlington wanted and work with the state reps so that you continue to honor those? And I'm sure some people saw today, it was very exciting. They had a veto override for Winooski voting, and so that was very exciting local control situation. So Owen, how would you do that?
Yeah, I would say that, and I've kind of said this before, which is about elevating those stories of the people that live in our ward. So, I would say, and I've talked about servant leadership in previous forums. I do believe in this idea of servant leadership kind of to my very core, and that that the positions and the greatest power of this particular role is to make sure that those voices are heard by fellow city councilors, that they're being heard by the mayor, and because these things do go to the statewide level, to actually work with our state reps to bring those stories in front of the governor, our representatives in state. So I would say the work that I would really be focused on, while I would most certainly be supportive of many of those charter changes that came through, the work that I see that's important for city councilors to do is not necessarily just to be door knocking when it's convenient for a campaign, but to be door knocking all year round to get the perspectives of the people in my neighborhood, hear their stories, and bring those stories to our city leadership and to the state.
Great, thank you. And Joe, do you need me to repeat the question, or kind of you got it? All right, thanks, Joe. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we have to make sure that when the legislature is back in January, we're, like Owen said, bringing those stories to Montpelier, and really organizing to make sure that we have advocates in the State House working to get those through. We just saw this rental registry bill that got that unfortunately didn't make it across the finish line at the end of the session. Would have really helped tenants. And so, with so many competing interests in the State House, and frankly, a lot of representatives in the legislature that don't feel like tenants need more protections. A lot of them are landlords themselves. So specifically related to just cause, I think that's going to be a hurdle that we have to overcome. And so I'm absolutely, after August 17th, looking forward to doing that organizing, whether I'm elected to the city council or not. So that's what I will do for those charter changes and the many more that I hope that we can get on the ballot with hopefully Prop 0. So. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Joe. All right, well, now it has come to the time, my favorite part of forums, when our wonderful audience is free to ask questions of the candidates. And anyone can ask questions. You don't have to live in Ward 3. Anyone on the call can ask questions. And of course, just a reminder, if you don't feel comfortable asking your question, you can pop it in the chat or private message me and I'd be happy to read it. So would anyone like to kick us off? Barbara, I saw you're off mute. Do you have a question?
Yes, I actually have a few, and I'll start with one, and then with time. And I guess I'd like to ask Owen, and I am a Ward 3 resident. I understand why you're running and your admiration for Brian, and I understand about servant leadership, but if your ideas and ideals are close to those of Joe, why not just let him carry that banner? And how will you keep your independence from the mayor and the other Democrats on the council?
Okay. Owen, if you'd like to answer some of that, we would like, I personally would like more broad questions for both candidates, not as pointed for the forum, but that's okay.
Why is that?
Well, no, it's fine. I just, that's fine. Okay. Owen, go ahead. If you'd like to answer the question.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I am continuing to run, because I do believe that elections, really kind of force us to elevate our game. If there's, and to really hone and understand. I also think too, Barbara, that that one of the best ways for us to actually get really to better understand the needs of our community is through the opportunity to campaign. And I would say that from my own experience, of campaigning more recently for within the Progressive Party was that I learned things that otherwise would never have really had the opportunity to experience, and really get to know the needs of my neighbors. So I would say I can appreciate that Joe and I are going to land on the same side of these things very often. We might differ a little bit on implementation here and there, but I would say that I think we all do better with competition within the electoral process. So that's one. And then as it relates to impartiality, again, I'll kind of get back to this idea of servant leadership, which is that when you truly and genuinely operate from a place where you are actively engaged in understanding what the needs are of the people you serve, that puts you in a position for neutrality, because the experiences that happen in Ward 3 are different from what happened in the Hill section and from Ward 7 and from Ward 2. They are, and by genuinely listening to and elevating those stories, the positions of where I will fall on certain things will often mirror where I live and who I'm hearing from.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we have Keenan has a question. If you'd like to go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keenan. So my question is sort of more broadly, we see a lot of what I will describe as performative anti-racism work around the city, where it's work that is mostly performative. It doesn't result in substantive policy changes. So I'm wondering what specific policies you would change to benefit our BIPOC neighbors and dismantle white supremacy across the city.
Okay, Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Keenan. Like I said earlier, I'm absolutely in favor of community control of police and establishing that independent commission. I think we saw with the unfortunate resolution of having to pay some sort of severance package to an officer because of the way the union contract worked, that the discipline process did not catch that, and now we were left with that unfortunate conclusion. And so I think, just more transparency and accountability on that front is crucial. And so that's a first step. The second step is how we go forward in this process of hiring a new police chief, and really making sure that the folks who are most impacted by the police department and the bias in the police department are involved in those discussions. And then I want us to make sure that we're taking the vital steps of actually redirecting those funds. This conversation about hiring more police officers is terrible and should not be where we're directing our attention. And so making sure that we're making crucial steps to hire more mental health workers. I would really love to see that not happen under the police department. And so those are a few of the things that I really would hope to push forward on the council.
Thank you, Joe. Owen, do you need the question repeated, or do you kind of, okay, great, thanks.
I'm good. I think that the issues that BIPOC members of our community face actually extend beyond just the police. So Joe had mentioned earlier about how, in his commission, there was very little representation. So one of the things that I learned in creating a program at the Sailing Center this summer that was a scholarship designed specifically for the BIPOC population of Burlington was that had we not engaged Trusted Community Voices, which is a group inside of CEDO, in the development of that program, we would have failed. There's like, it was, me and, members of our staff designing it, but there were insight that came from that that were absolutely crucial with us and that we credit to the success of that program this summer. And what I can tell you is that there are so many times when the city of Burlington is undergoing policy development, design, or change without that impact the BIPOC community, without anyone being present. So while I don't entirely know how to design this yet, one of the things that I would be championing in Burlington as a city councilor would be that commissions are required to have at least a BIPOC member be on each of the commissions, and or at least that there be somebody in the room during public comment available to provide insight and support for feedback on those issues. And if those things are not available, that the meeting be suspended until such thing was present. We have the ability to suspend a meeting if we don't have a quorum of members. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to suspend a meeting for the purpose of not being able to have representative bodies from our community available and present to do that. That's number one thing that I think we could be doing. The other thing that we can be doing is within the regards to equity. So, and we have to think about what are the levers of power that we have within the city to try and address equity. And one of those is actually regulation, permits, and other things related to how we regulate businesses in the city. I think that it's one thing to create initiatives to support BIPOC-owned businesses in Burlington. What I think we should do to take it a step further is to actually have a front-of-the-line policy that allows BIPOC-owned businesses that are either applying for permits or other things otherwise within the city to actually get a front of the line when it comes to things related to taxes or other regulations that exist within our permitting or other process within the city, to try and advance and support those initiatives beyond just creating a policy and support network, to actually do it in how we regulate and oversee those entities as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Keenan, for a very good question. Very important. So does anyone else have any questions for the candidates before Tom has a question but wanted to give space? And I know, Barbara, you said you had a couple more questions. Does anyone else, before we go back to Barbara, have any questions for Joe and Owen? All right. So Barbara, would you like to ask another question?
I'll try to make it more general, Emily. I don't know.
No, that's okay. It was just my immediate reaction was because I'm just trying to have it more of a forum and not a,
One general and one specific. There's the combination of Ward 2 and 3 for representation, and then there's just Ward 3. And as a downtown resident, sometimes I think that there are many issues in the Old North End that overlap with downtown issues, but there are some unique issues probably that downtown residents have. And at last count, this was several years ago, there were about 800 people who live downtown, and probably by now there are more. And so have you thought about, because a significant part of your district will be downtown, some downtown issues that you would like to see addressed? And just to sort of shoehorn this in, in terms of affordable housing, which you both are for, and I am too, would you be against allowing developers to buy out of their obligations under the inclusionary zoning rule to pay money and not have to build the affordable housing? And also the mayor has hinted many times that he would like to get rid of that rule. And I want to know how you feel about that.
Okay, well, that's a few. So, Owen, would you like to go first in that? And at any point, if you want Barbara to ask the next part again, please let us know.
Sure.
So if I understand correctly, the questions are, one, what are the issues that I would address around specifically downtown residents? And then number two is how do I feel about inclusionary zoning?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, okay. So I'm a downtown resident. I live on the corner of King and St. Paul Street. Yeah. So I would say that one of the things that needs to happen as it relates to investment that would have a large impact in downtown is increased investment in the street outreach team with the Heritage Center. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the street outreach team, but I become kind of very aware of the positive impact of their work. During my time on the United Way's board, we looked at numbers of of performance impacts, and they've had some turnover in recent years in their leadership. If I had the opportunity to really dig into how we're spending money from the police budget, what I would be doing is taking a significant portion of that, that social service migration of resources and really making a large investment in the street outreach team, because I think they are probably one of the most effective organizations in helping manage some of the behavioral issues that we see regularly in downtown specifically. Now, street outreach doesn't just push people off of the street. That's something that's really important. Street outreach team does a really great job of addressing crisis before it becomes violent, and they do an exceptionally good job of helping individuals who are in moments of crisis in downtown actually make their way into the appropriate social service networks that they need. So I would say that's probably one of the most significant, from living in downtown, things that I would be able to do in a short period of time to address some of the things that I see in that regard. And then there is no reason to roll back inclusionary zoning. I would not agree with the mayor on that at all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. And yes, Barbara, that's an excellent question. And now, Joe, would you like to answer the questions? And again, if you need any repeating, Barbara or myself can assist.
Sure. So, I lived downtown myself on Pine Street, Pine and Main for most of the pandemic. Only recently moved to North Champlain Street. So I absolutely understand that downtown is a significant part of Ward 3. And, there's a lot of issues that I understand do get looked over. And so, I think the biggest thing for me is the Parkway, making sure that project does not go through the King Maple neighborhood is crucial for me. I've heard some about the alternatives that have been talked about, so I want to hear more about that. But, absolutely making sure that we're not driving more traffic through that area is crucial. So that's, I think, probably the biggest issue that I've given some thought to. Another thing is, the pit. I have no idea when that project is going to be resolved. And I know that it has just been such a hindrance for so many people downtown. And, I have opposed it from the start. I think it's a tragedy that we're kind of in this situation where two developers are suing each other and we're stuck with no real end in sight or any sort of resolution on housing or any front, really. So I guess my answer in terms of representing downtown better, it's a hard place to canvas. There's a lot of locked buildings. So really being able to have those conversations with folks if they don't answer the phone, it's a challenge that I sort of faced campaigning over the last week and a half. And so would really look for some innovative ways to make sure that those conversations are including residents downtown, and we're finding ways to have those conversations and understand there's going to be extra work involved in doing that. And I'm here for that 100%. So thank you for the question, Barbara.
Thank you.
Yes, that was an excellent question. I actually, before I moved to South.
Sorry, I missed the bit on
Oh,
inclusionary
right.
zoning.
And-
Absolutely would not support amending that rule to allow developers to forego that. We absolutely have to build more affordable housing. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And I was just going to say, I just realized that before I moved to South Burlington in 2005, I lived downtown after school. And it's very interesting. Yeah, I lived above Manhattan Pizza in a really crappy studio. But yeah, it's important. Ward 3 is a very unique ward with and such. Well, all right, so we are almost ready for Nell, but last second, any quick questions? Everyone good? Everyone, okay, so remember that if you are a RAD member, you will get to vote, and you will have a few days once you receive your ballot to do so. And maybe Tom or Sophie, if you could just drop that in one more time for folks who want to sign up to be RAD members, that'd be great. I've been a member since 2015. Yep, that's right. And since the beginning. And it's great. And sustaining memberships really help organizations count on that each month that they're gonna get. So it's very good for that, and it will help have wonderful RAD staff like Tom and Sophie there for all of us. So thank you. Well, thank you so much to the candidates. We are very lucky to have two amazing candidates who seem to be very dedicated to their community, both in the past and going forward, regardless of the outcome of the election. It sounds like both of you will continue to stay engaged and work with residents on the needs. And yeah, great. So there's contact information for the candidates, and if you want to follow up with them. So thank you so much again, Owen and Joe, for being here today and participating in our democracy. Tom.
With permission from Joe and Owen, when we do send this out to the Burlington chapter members that could not make it tonight with the recording of the video of the forum, if we could include your contact details, that would obviously help their decision making, if that's okay.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, now we have wonderful Nell Carpenter, who has sat here during our forum. And I'm not sure what ward Nell lives in or if Burlington, but whoever is elected to Burlington City Council, is there for the entire city and even surrounding cities like myself. So I'm very invested in that as well. So thank you, Nell, so much for being here, and we would love to hear about the campaign that you're working on and others are working on about community control of police. So why don't you take it away?
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for making the space. And just before I start, so I can have the right expectations, I should wrap up by 7, right?
We often go over by a few minutes. I don't
Okay.
want to limit you to 15 minutes. Use what you need to use. If people need to drop out, then they need to drop out. This is all being recorded anyway, and I'm sure they can catch up at the end. So
okay, great.
Now.
Awesome. I live in Ward 4. I actually think though that, and they might just be wrapping up now, but there's a crew of canvassers out potentially literally in Ward 3, talking with neighbors about community control of police right now or for the past couple of hours. I am in Connecticut visiting family, so I'm not anywhere near Ward 4, Ward 3, or Burlington, but I'm psyched to be here with you all. I am going to start by doing a couple of things. I'm going to drop this URL. Here, let me just, because there's a lot of materials about this. There's a lot of this, and we're really excited to have a website where it has captured some of it. So I'm just going to put that there so that I'm not going to get through nearly all of it today. So feel free to peruse there. And then also I'll drop my contact information for either signing up for anything that we might talk about, or just like if you want to have a phone conversation. This is a really complicated thing, and I'm sure obviously this was teed up well with the charter change question. Charter changes are super complex, and I'm sure some of you actually who are maybe now following like really involved through to the state process might even know it more intimately than I do or than we do. As someone mentioned, this was vetoed after it was passed out of council. The mayor vetoed it. The council upheld the veto. We're taking a different route now. And so I'm going to talk about the proposal itself. And then I'm going to talk about, I'll just give a little spiel about where we are now, why we're still doing this, how we're still doing this, even after a veto, and how you can support. I'm going to share my screen just because, again, it's a lot of information. And so if you want to watch the recording and pause, then you can read the screen, because I am going to just kind of like blow through slides. But again, myself and so many others are so happy to have conversations. Like there literally were just like 10 people walking around Burlington having conversations about this tonight. So the hope is that this is a kind of a snowball. So could one of you hosts please give me screen sharing capabilities, please? Thank you. We refer to this as power in our team meetings. Give me the power. All right, here it goes. Can you see this okay? And let me see if I can present and you can still see it okay. Do you see it as full screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I don't know why it was on the last slide. That was convenient, but this color, this thing, this indicates updates and whatnot. If you see this on social media, this is the great color we've chosen for all of our stuff. So this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. It's something we don't overstress, we don't really overcare about, but a fluid, growing group of us refer to ourselves as People for Police Accountability. We're folks who have been working on this for as long as since October, when Councillor Freeman, or even well before this, right? But sort of formally when Councillor Freeman introduced this into the Joint Public Safety Committee and Police Commission way back when. And so that's that. It's not an organization. It's not anything. It aligns with a lot of things. A lot of groups have sort of made statements of support in support of what we're doing, have made platforms for us, sort of like what RAD's doing, but that's who we are. So there's the website. That's the email that is gonna go to all of us. But again, I'll drop my personal info in case anyone wants to just follow up directly with me. All right, so, oops, we went too far. Okay, so in a nutshell, as many of you probably know, about the charter, city charters are basically state law. It's like the most official of the official, high up thing that dictates the city. So it's higher up than ordinances or resolutions. It supersedes a lot I'll get into that a little bit more afterwards. But basically what this charter change proposal is seeking to do is to replace a section, Title 20, that basically refers to investigation and discipline of Burlington Police Department. What that currently says is that comments about the Burlington Police Department are made to the police department, and that internal investigations are done internally, and that the police chief has the sole power to make disciplinary decisions. And if the chief is involved, then the city council and mayor step in, but otherwise it's solely the police chief, and they are the one who get to say things like suspension without notice, or fire, or this or that, that's part of how I think someone referred to it. There was the situation with the Battery Park movement of these 3 abusive officers who the city just kept saying, we can't do anything about it. So there is currently no accountability, right? There's no transparency in that process either. It's pretty hard to understand. It's pretty impossible to follow. It's asking police to police themselves, which I think I don't need to convince this group is not great. The police commission, we can talk more about the police commission later if anyone really wants to chew on that a bit, but the police commission can be involved in investigations and disciplinary decisions if the case is shared with them, but they don't have power to subpoena evidence. They don't have a final say. They can't override anything that the chief might say. So this proposal, again, was originally introduced by City Councilor Perry Freeman. Before they even introduced it, it had seen a ton of community members had seen it and contributed to it. Quite literally just a document sent around where people could comment. Many BIPOC community members, many people who are part of communities who are vulnerable to police violence or otherwise have proximity and awareness of it. The version that's on the website that you can see and that I'm going to talk about now is not identical to that, but it holds up the same sort of 5 primary components. Again, that's in the weeds. We can talk about that more if anyone wants to. It's inspired by, and the 5 components I'll talk about are inspired by the ACLU's principles for effective civilian community oversight. It's received support by the ACLU of Vermont, NACOL, so the National Association of Community Oversight of Law Enforcement, and many community members and many community organizations, Peace and Justice Center, Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative, Racial Justice Alliance, and you can see more about that on our website. And it's also inspired by existing models. So this is something people are often like, whoa, what is this brand new thing? This community control as a concept tracks like way back to the Black Panther Party, and it's implemented currently in cities in various stages of models. There are cities who are currently working through this in their legislature, obviously with the sort of national like political reckoning with racism and police brutality. So yes, so that's some overviews. So now I'm going to go through the primary 5 components. And what I'll say first about these is that these 5 components are not just a summary, but they are like critical. These 5 components basically are the pillars of this proposal. And without any one of them, this proposal is, ineffective basically, and is not going to achieve the level of accountability for folks who experience police violence or just generally interact with the police on a day-to-day basis. And so these are 5 that were in the original proposal. They're 5 that will stay, and they're 5 that basically this group will not support a proposal unless these 5 are there. So I'll go through these quickly as I'm watching the time quickly go by. So the first is disciplinary power, of course. So the ability to hire, fire, and discipline. And this includes the police chief. The police chief also retains powers to suspend without notice, but this group can do it, this community oversight board. Investigate power, again, this is a big one. The ability to conduct independent investigations, subpoena witnesses and documents, and access records. That is, again, critical. And something that currently does not extend outside of the police department in any way. Independence, the ability to function entirely dependently of the Burlington Police Department and have independent resources for investigation, for if they need consultants, for legal counsel, and just sort of create a contrast. Our current police commission very much operates within BPD, as they are in sort of an advisory role related to BPD policy and protocols and whatnot. They are very much embedded within BPD. And so this group would not be. Can I get to the next slide? Okay, representation, arguably one of the, they're all important, but most important pillars of this is that this board basically be made up by people with the most proximity to police violence. And so you can read in the proposal exactly how that's articulated, but it's articulated in a way that will hold up theoretically in the state legislature. But this is critical because not only currently is the only person with disciplinary authority quite literally employed by and embedded within the Burlington Police Department, but it's one person, and it's a person who is likely to not have ever in a really substantial way sort of experienced a different side of police and who is deeply embedded. And so another piece of this representation is that it will exclude people who are currently or former law enforcement personnel, including family affiliations. Again, you can read the proposal to sort of see how that's articulated. But this is really, it's looking at BIPOC people currently living with or with experience of homelessness, mental health, substance use, queer and trans folks, people with disabilities, who we know through data, through anecdotes in Burlington, in Vermont, nationally, right around the world, are more vulnerable to police violence and are not heard typically in any sort of formal structure of accountability. And then transparency, so full transparency. So that means that any sort of hearings and meetings would be, I'm like not going to get this right, subject to the open meeting something law, would be public unless, and they're allowed to, part of it is that they're allowed to set rules for things like if it involves a child, then they can sort of close it off and they can make those rules. But the idea is that it's fully transparent, right? So we know how many complaints are coming in. We know who they're about. We know what the outcome of them was. A person can track that, a community can track that in a way that really does not happen right now. Great. So these are just some other kind of things that are sort of often FAQs, but also just important components. So this would not replace the current police commission. They have a different role. This body is being called for in response to divesting the need to divest the power that currently sits with the police chief to the community, right? Because the police should be accountable to the community that they have such a significant impact on. So this would be separate, and there's also, right, an envisionment that they would be quite complementary because the police commission has to do with policies and procedures. They're embedded, written into the charter change. There are some places where there can be collaboration, but this is really mainly just about that piece of investigation and discipline. This body and their decisions would supersede the police contract or the police union contract. And with that also, BPD would have to comply with this body. Again, city charter is like city law. The body would investigate civilian complaints in cases reported to them. So no phishing, same thing, people have to come to them. The body would be subject to due process in any decisions that they're making and any sort of investigations or resulting proceedings that occur. And again, the police department would still be able to conduct internal investigations if this body didn't take something up, or if, you know, the police chief wanted to make a decision before a member of the body did in terms of discipline, that's allowed. This body would supersede and sort of have the final say. Did I go too past? No, I just went one. Great. So how do you change the city charter? I think a lot of you are, like, again, intimately familiar with that. So there's the city council route, and that's what these charter changes, amazing ones that y'all pushed through, went through. Ours was vetoed. So what we're doing right now is the petition route. So you can petition if you get 5% of registered voters signed on a petition asking for something. What our petition asks for is a special election, and that on that special election, in that special election, there's a ballot where city members will vote for community control of police. Then that can happen. So we're basically balloting for this election to vote on it. We're not balloting or petitioning for this to happen. There's 2 steps there. So you can see this. So that's what's happening right now. And like I said, there are people out finishing up Canvas routes as we speak, out twice a week. These conversations have been happening. People have been calling into council. People have been engaging their neighbors. We've hosted webinars, etc. And so we're just really excited to be seeing this momentum that really doesn't rely on the council, that doesn't rely on our elected officials to actually hear what we're saying and to make decisions that align with that, but really this momentum that is built up out of wanting to protect our neighbors and really see that people around us have mechanisms for things like accountability, because as we see, right, like pretty all too regularly, our officers in Burlington specifically not being held accountable for abuse and violence against our neighbors. So I'm going to pause there and ask for questions, but seeing the time, also acknowledge that the website does have a lot of information. I'm happy to connect with anyone after, but like, please ask me anything that might be so super glaring. And Leah, I just saw your question that I can answer first, which is how or where can we sign the petition? So this is something that we're sort of working our way through as we learn how to do this. We have an online petition, but that doesn't satisfy the sort of legal process of the petitioning. So there's a physical petition and someone has to witness it, etc. So our Canvas sort of on the ground efforts are happening and are collecting a lot of signatures. We're also currently working on how can we find people like some of you potentially on this call who want to sign, but maybe whose doors aren't going to be knocked in the next 2 months to sign. So what I would say is stay tuned, and that'll likely come down the line. But any other questions? Yeah, I can't see hands, so go ahead, just shout them out.
Sophie?
Yeah, I was wondering, is there, so this may have already been mentioned, but I'm thinking about compensation for folks who are working on this. And I'm curious what that looks like.
Yep. Yeah. So it's written into the charter. So as you all probably know, right, the charter is so high up that it's so binding that there's a disadvantage to getting like uber specific, because say we said we want people to get $15 an hour, and then 10 years from now, $15 an hour is way not enough. So I think it's articulated, it's in the proposal as a livable wage as defined by the city, something like that, and fair compensation. So there is some strong language. We've had legal folks with us along this whole time. There's some strong language to see to it that this group is compensated particularly strongly, especially in acknowledgement of the fact that the high likelihood that some folks who are on this board, again, have proximity to police violence, and that this could actually be challenging work, even if they're right, while they might be willingly stepping into the position.
Awesome. Thanks, Nell.
Yeah.
Tom?
I'd first like to acknowledge Nell's and the group's foresight into not making a charter change too specific. That seems to be the one thing that politicians always use as an excuse as to why they can't pass a charter change. Either it's not specific enough or it's too specific. Keep it as vague as possible, because you want to give yourself leeway when it finally does get back to the city council. You can start making ordinances around it. Definitely finding that would just cause eviction. And Nell, please reach out regarding just cause eviction, because I've got a wealth of
Yeah, I absolutely will.
on that front. What I've learned about charter changes through that process. But the question I've got is there a deadline for the signatures that you're looking to get? What's the date, and what are you doing in order to try and meet that deadline?
Yeah, good question. I'm the date is slipping. We have a date, it's in August. So basically after this was vetoed, there was sort of a very, very short pause of, are we going to keep doing this? Are we going to keep meeting? Are we still going to keep? And everyone was like, yeah, of course we're going to keep meeting this. At that point, we laid out a sort of timeline of our plan. And over the past couple of months, I've been doing a lot of engagement and outreach and education and webinars and whatnot. And starting, I don't know what week this is, we were like, okay, we got to do this now. We have the petition approved. We got to get on the ground and start getting signatures. So we're doing that. We're tracking how many. We have sort of weekly checkpoints. We also have things in the back of our minds, like doing this more sort of targeted, like you just tell us you want to sign and we'll come to your house, so that we're not necessarily spending a lot of time places where people might not sign. But at the same time, we acknowledge that there's two steps to this. There's the petition, and if it goes through, if we get enough signatures, then there's the election. And so we're also just there's a bigger goal of this, of just engaging in conversations with our neighbors about the Burlington Police Department, and about envisioning a future in which the Burlington Police Department has a lot more accountability and plays a significantly different role in our community.
Okay, Barbara did have a question in the chat, I think.
So the part about due process seemed ambiguous. Do people accused before the board have the right to due process, or is it members of the board? So say someone made a complaint about you and there was an investigation done, and then there was, for example, a hearing or whatnot, you would be subject to due process. So if anything made it into courts, basically the concern that some people had was, does this supersede the law in general, or how decisions are made about people? And the answer is no, that this would have to follow due process. There's no just big broad decisions that aren't checked by any sort of legal anything. Does that help?
Well, due process is a standard under the law where the person has the right to confront his or her accusers, has the right to present witnesses in his or her own defense, stuff like that. And so I don't know about the law so much. It's a standard in labor relations and in court too, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like you probably know more about due process than me. And what I would
the due process, you can't just accuse a person and have it be done with. The person has some rights in that process. That's all.
Got it. So I'll say you probably know more about due process. Others do. I don't know everything. What I do know is that folks on our team with legal expertise have confirmed for us that this will align and have space for due process. So I'm happy to connect you with folks who could speak to that in a more informed way.
Thank you.
Now, how do folks who want to canvass get involved?
So here are, and I just realized I was supposed to add something that I didn't to the slide, but that's fine. Here we just kind of pulled together 5 ways that you can get involved. So one is just generally spreading the word. Like I said, there's the goal of the petition, there's the goal of this passing, and there's also the bigger picture movement, right, of having conversations with people about community control of the police, about the police in general. Canvas with us, so there's an email there. I figured you can't click a link that's on your screen, so I included this QR code, and I can also just send info to whoever to include it to follow up with you all about. Share websites or updates. If you're on Instagram, that's the handle that's most often going to post, but you can also just post the website, invite people to check it out yourself. donate. That's where I didn't include the Venmo. I'll include that in the follow-up information. But things like we have to print a ton of these petitions and print out proposals so that we can show them to folks and they can be fully informed, snacks to power our on-the-ground team. And then just stay connected with us. So emails will go out, right, about progress, about future ways, even past the petition process. So those I would say would be the steps. And I'm happy also to sort of write up a little blurb that formalizes this, that can go out in an email. So you're not all scrambling right now to do something. Awesome. I'll pull your email out.
Great.
And I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay. Well, thank
Anything else?
Yeah.
I know we're way over time.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, that's fine. Does anyone else have anything for Nell? Thank you so much, Nell, for being here and sharing everything. And hopefully some RAD members will get tapped in to this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for having me.
So we are over time, and sorry everyone, you're probably hungry and whatnot. But quickly, there's 2 announcements. There is a Bust the Filibuster rally in Battery Park on Saturday, June 16th at 4 p.m. with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. So we're promoting that for them. And then there is, last month we heard from Sophie about some summer engagement stuff. So there's a virtual training on July oh yes, excellent. Sophie's putting in the links. There's a virtual training on July 1st. So that's great for people who want to do some summer organizing around issues. And remember, the best organizing happens between elections, although now we're not getting any election break because of the special election. So that's exciting. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and Joe and Owen and Nell, and very excited to have wonderful candidates for a very wonderful ward and who will represent the city very well for the next 6 months. And thank you, Tom and Sophie, for your awesome skills. And Jesse's still on at Democracy Creative. And yeah, well, have a good night, everyone. Is there anything else anyone wants to add, Tom or Sophie? No? Okay.
Well, just thank you, Emily. Thank you for holding it down tonight and with such grace.
Are we going to go crash Dahlia's birthday?
I just messaged her. I said, not tonight, but another day.
Oh.
Go out and get her drinks. I feel
Yeah.
like tonight is for her and her mates. You know what I mean? Let's
Yeah,
not crash that one.
I'm like 70. But thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.